Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Nick the Brave Chemo Kitties and Canines podcast. I'm your host, Nick the Brave. As someone battling cancer, I know how important it is to stay positive in the rough times. This is the only podcast that looks at the heroes behind the scene who help people that need it the most. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Nick the Brave Chemo Kitties and Canines podcast. I'm your host, Nick the Brave. And today I'm so excited about today's special guest, Dr. Douglas Reeves. Dr. Reeves is an educator, speaker, and author. He is the founder of Creative Leadership Solutions and a global research consulting and professional learning organization. Hi, Dr. Reeves. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you so much. I'm really pleased to be with you today.
I know I told the listeners a little about yourself. Could you tell a bit more?
Sure. I live in Boston, Massachusetts. It's a beautiful fall day here when the leaves are turning. I teach not only students, but I've taught teachers all over the world. As a result, I've also been able to write a lot of books and try to share what I've learned with both teachers and school leaders everywhere I go.
So my first question is, this podcast is about people who help others. You have many things going on in your life, particularly the work you do with teachers all out the world. How do you strive to help other people as you do all those jobs?
Well, I'll give you a couple of examples, Nick. One of the things that a lot of people like to do is writing. So I've done everything from help do an elementary newspaper club, middle school as well, where I help students gain the confidence to write and get their names famous because it's out there in the newspaper. And I do the same thing with adults, helping them to write, whether it's at the university level or write to get published. The other thing that I've tried to do internationally is I've spent a lot of time in Africa, and it's interesting that we've got our own set of problems in the United States, but when you spend time in Africa, you understand how much they value education, and you'll see people literally coming out of a hut with no shoes, walking miles to school, but they're so happy and they sing all the way and they love going to school. So I like helping students and adults in the United States, but it's really fun to be in Africa too.
What made you get on the positivity track?
I think it's because it works. I've, like everybody else, have had some disappointments, but I always look on the bright side. Even during this pandemic, I know that we got to make the best of it, and we got to learn to be resilient and bounce back. I would tell you that people like you are a good inspiration to me, just like I've tried to be an inspiration to help other people too.
Mm-hmm. What is the biggest impact you've had in people's lives, and how do you think you've done that?
That's a really interesting question to think about, because sometimes the honest answer is you don't even know. There have been times in my life as a teacher that 20 years later, somebody will say, oh, gee, Doug, this made a big difference in my life. And I didn't even know what they were talking about. It's happened to me here and abroad, or they'll say, gee, I read this book and it made a big difference. I didn't even know it. I'll bet, Nick, there are people who listen to your podcast that you don't even know that you're making a big difference in their life too.
You are on social media and work with a lot of different types of people. However, sometimes social media isn't so positive. How do you stay positive with the negative people that might be out there?
Well, so one key is I just never argue. Here's a saying that's probably worth remembering. Never fight with pigs. You just get dirty and the pigs enjoy it. So I don't fight with people. If they disagree with me, that's okay. It's a free country, but I just don't get into these bitter fights back and forth.
Not everybody has the same opinions. People are different. Do you ever think how your positivity brings people together? If so, how does that work?
Well, that's a really interesting question, because I think different opinions are important in a free society. One of the things we have to do is to make it safe for people to have different opinions. So, for example, when I'm teaching, of what I'll do is, even if everybody acts, and you know what it's like, people kind of like to get along, but I may have to say, okay, half the class, you can agree with me, but the other half the class, you have to say, Doug is wrong because ... And we get some interesting back and forth divergent opinions. My own conviction, Nick, is that you get better decisions and better thinking, not when everybody agrees with each other, but when with respect and courtesy, when we can disagree. I just think that's what makes for a good discussion and a good country.
What are the positive things you would like to tell everyone to know about people you've met in your travels?
Yeah, you made me think about that a lot. And I will tell you the most inspirational one that I have ever seen is when I was in Zambia. And I went to this school in this rural area. It's like 3 hours away from any kind of city. And these people were all singing and dancing. And they were saying words that I didn't really understand. And what was interesting is that they were, as you may know, that HIV/AIDS is a real problem in Africa. And all these people were singing and dancing. So I learned two things from that. Number one, I said, what are the words that they're singing? And the words of the song were, "We are so grateful, we are so grateful, we are so grateful." And then I learned that these people are really struggling with HIV/AIDS. And it just made me think, if they can say, "We're grateful," then, man, I'd better be grateful as well. They really inspired me.
What are the long-term goals in terms of what you can do for other people?
It's not so much long-term. I mean, in the long term, I certainly want to write more books, and I want to try to help as many people as I can. I want to continue to try to build schools and support people. But, sometimes it's just the day-to-day things. It's not the great big goals. It's what can you do today to give somebody some encouragement. You never know. For example, Nick, I travel a lot, and you can, in this time, people are pretty nervous when they're traveling. So just a little bit of courtesy to help somebody with their bags, or help somebody who looks like they're lost. I live in a city, so it's not unusual to see people out there with maps open and they have no idea where they're going. So it's not just the big stuff. It's little acts of kindness that help too.
I'm writing the book too.
Good for you. Please tell me about it.
It's my journey through cancer and that stuff. So my mom's company, Solution Tree, they're helping me write a book.
Solution Tree is my publisher also. They're a great publisher. I'm glad you're doing that.
I always ask this question: who do you think is someone positive that should be on my podcast in the future?
I can think of so many people, but since you mentioned Solution Tree, I'll tell you a really great guy you might want to think about, and that's Ken Williams is his name. And Mr. Williams and I, do you already know him? Maybe you know him. Okay. Has he already been on your podcast?
Yes.
Oh,
but
okay.
He's the one that was referred you.
Oh, for goodness sake. Okay. Well, let me just put my head to it for just a second. Do you want people in education, or do you want people outside of education?
It can be in education. It can be out of the education.
Okay. Let's see. I wonder if it would be helpful to hear from somebody. I have a colleague in New Mexico named Lisa Almeida, and she's a senior executive with our company, and she has 3 kids, is very experienced and nationally known, and also has had to be a really positive person herself. So maybe that's a person I could put you in touch with. Okay.
Thank you for everything that you've done for people all over the world. Thank you for being on my podcast, Dr. Reese.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.